The night Kwame threw cold water on Nia's face and dragged her out of bed to serve his mistress breakfast, 3 people laughed at her: his mother, his sister, and the woman sitting in Nia's chair wearing Nia's robe. Nia cooked every plate in silence, because the woman they called worthless had been hiding a secret worth $80 billion. It was 3 in the morning when Nia felt the cold hit her face. Not a splash, a full cup. Ice water poured slow and deliberate over her forehead, her closed eyes, her lips, her neck. She gasped awake, choking and coughing, her fingers clawing at the soaked sheets like a woman pulled underwater. Her chest heaved, her body shook from the shock. Water pooled in the hollow of her collarbone and ran down her arms, and standing over her, fully dressed with his arms crossed and his jaw tight like a man giving orders to hired help, was her husband Kwame. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't even blink. He looked down at her the way someone looks at a stain on the carpet, something to be dealt with, not cared for. And then he said it. "Get up, go to the kitchen. My woman just got here and she's hungry." Nia blinked the water out of her eyes. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Kwame tilted his head and stepped closer. "Did I stutter?" I said, "Get up." She pulled the soaking covers off her body, set her bare feet on the cold hardwood floor, stood up. Water dripped from the hem of her nightgown and made small puddles on the wood. She didn't reach for a towel. She didn't wipe her face. She walked past Kwame without looking at him, her wet feet leaving prints on the hallway floor, and as she moved, the thin gold anklet around her left ankle, a delicate chain with a small key charm, caught the dim light from the hallway ceiling and flickered like a whisper. When she reached the kitchen, the scene waiting for her was worse than the water. Lorraine was sitting at the dining table in Nia's robe. Not a robe she'd brought with her. Nia's robe. The silk one with the lavender trim that Nia's grandmother had gifted her the Christmas before she passed. Lorraine had it tied loose around her waist, her legs crossed, her freshly done nails tapping against the screen of her phone. She didn't look up when Nia walked in. Didn't shift. Didn't acknowledge that another human being had entered the room. She just kept scrolling like she was sitting in her own home, in her own chair, wearing her own robe. But she wasn't the only one there. Kwame's mother, Gladys, was already awake. She stood by the counter in a housecoat, pouring herself a cup of coffee from Nia's pot, using Nia's mug like it was any other casual morning. She looked at Nia standing in the doorway, soaking wet and trembling, and her face didn't soften, not even a little. She shook her head and clicked her tongue. "Took you long enough. Don't just stand there looking pitiful. Fix the woman something to eat." Nia opened her mouth to respond, but Gladys raised a finger. "And make it right this time. Lord knows you can barely boil an egg without burning something." And then there was Trina, Kwame's younger sister, perched on the kitchen stool with her phone raised, camera already recording. She didn't try to hide it. She aimed the lens right at Nia, bit her bottom lip to hold back a grin, and leaned toward Lorraine. "Girl, watch this. This is about to be good." Nia stood in the middle of her own kitchen, dripping wet, barefoot, 3 in the morning, surrounded by 4 people who were supposed to be her family, and not a single one of them looked at her like she mattered. She opened the refrigerator, pulled out eggs, butter, bread, grabbed a pan from the cabinet, turned on the stove. Her hands shook as she cracked the first egg, but she steadied them. She cracked the second one cleaner, then the third. She moved slow, but without hesitation. She didn't look at Lorraine, didn't glance at Gladys, didn't acknowledge Trina's phone. She just cooked, quietly, methodically, like a woman performing a task she'd done 1,000 times while her heart was somewhere else entirely. When the plates were ready, she set them on the table. Eggs, toast, butter. A glass of juice she poured without being asked. Lorraine picked up her fork, took one bite, chewed slowly, and pushed the plate away. "These are dry." Gladys leaned over, inspected the eggs, and nodded. "See what I mean? Can't even get scrambled eggs right. I don't know what my son ever saw in you." Kwame walked in from the hallway, picked up a piece of toast from Lorraine's plate, chewed it, and tossed a crumpled napkin at Naya's chest. It bounced off her collarbone and fell to the floor. "This is why I found someone better," he said. And he didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, like he was proud of it. Nia bent down, picked up the napkin, wiped the counter with it, placed it neatly in the trash can. Then she turned and walked back to her room without a word. No tears, no trembling lip, no dramatic exit, just silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after a door closes softly. Nobody followed her. Nobody cared enough to wonder what she was thinking. But if they had followed her, if even one of them had cracked that door open, they would have seen something that would have changed everything. Because the moment Naya sat down on the edge of that soaked bed, she reached down and touched the small gold key charm dangling from her anklet. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, closed her eyes, and breathed like a woman who was holding a grenade and choosing, carefully, deliberately, not to pull the pin. Not yet. The next morning, the humiliation left the house and went public. Kwame took Lorraine grocery shopping in Naya's car. He opened the passenger door for Lorraine. Gladys climbed in the back. Lorraine wore oversized sunglasses and one of Naya's jackets. They drove through the neighborhood slow, windows down, music playing. Two neighbors standing on the sidewalk stopped mid-conversation to stare. One of them shook her head and whispered something to the other. The other pressed her hand to her chest and looked away. Nia watched from the upstairs bedroom window. The curtain pulled back just enough for one eye. Her face showed nothing. No anger, no sadness, no envy, just stillness. The kind of stillness you see in a lake before a storm rolls in. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up. A message from a number with no name saved to it. 5 words on the screen. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Nia. The board is waiting." Nia stared at the message for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the reply button. Then she set the phone down, face down, and looked back out the window. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Now let me take you back, way back, before the cold water, before Kwame, before any of this. Nia grew up in a small, warm house on a red dirt road in rural Georgia. No sidewalks, no streetlights, no neighbors close enough to wave at from the porch. Just tall pines, thick magnolias, and the sound of cicadas singing through the summer heat. She was raised by her grandmother, a woman named Opal, and Opal was the kind of woman this world doesn't make anymore. She never raised her voice, never cursed, never argued with anyone in public, but she could silence a grown man with one look across a dinner table. She grew her own collard greens and tomatoes, fixed her own plumbing with a wrench and a prayer, stitched quilts that looked like they belonged in a museum. She asked nobody for nothing, and everybody in that small town respected her for it. When Opal walked into the general store on Saturday mornings, people moved aside. Not out of fear, out of reverence. She carried herself like she knew something nobody else did. And she was right, because what nobody in that town knew, not the preacher, not the mayor, not even the mailman who delivered her letters every morning, was that Opal was one of the wealthiest women in the state of Georgia. Not comfortable, not doing all right for herself. Wealthy in a way that didn't match the woman hanging laundry on a clothesline in her backyard. She owned land. Hundreds of acres spread across 3 counties, passed down through her family for 5 generations. She held mineral rights on that land, rights that had been quietly appreciating for decades. Her late husband, a man named Earl, who had died before Nia was born, had been a quiet genius, an inventor who had filed patents for things the world used every day, but never credited to his name. Those patents generated royalties. Those royalties were reinvested, and over the decades, the trust Opal had built had compounded into something worth more than most people could imagine. But Opal never spent it, not on a bigger house, not on a nicer car, not on anything that would make people look twice. She believed money was not a tool for comfort. It was a weapon you kept hidden until the world forced your hand. She used to sit on her porch in the evenings, shelling peas into a metal bowl, with young Nia sitting at her feet, and she'd say, "Money is loud, baby, but power is quiet. Remember that. The quiet ones always win." When Opal got sick, the kind of sick that doesn't get better, she called Nia to her bedside. She was thin by then. Her hands trembled when she reached out, but her eyes were still sharp, still steady, still the same eyes that made grown men look at the floor. She unclasped the thin gold anklet from her own ankle, the one she'd worn every single day of Nia's life, and placed it in Nia's open palm. It had a small key charm on it, no bigger than a thumbnail. Opal closed Nia's fingers around it and held them tight. "This key doesn't open a door, baby," she said. "It reminds you that you are the door. Nobody gets through unless you allow it. You hear me? Nobody." Opal passed 3 days later, quietly, in her sleep. With the quilt she'd stitched herself pulled up to her chin, and the window cracked open so she could hear the pines. Everything she had built, every acre, every patent, every mineral right, every dollar, transferred into a private trust in Nia's name. A legal team that Opal had assembled decades ago managed it in complete silence. They didn't reach out to Nia until she turned 25. And when they finally did, when they sat her down in a quiet office in Savannah and explained what she now controlled, Nia had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from falling out of it. The trust was valued at over $80 billion, and nobody in the world knew except the lawyers, the accountants, and Nia herself. After college, Nia moved to Atlanta. She didn't buy a mansion on Peachtree. She rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where people minded their own business. She drove a used Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. She worked at a small non-profit that helped single mothers find affordable housing. She wore simple clothes, kept her hair natural, packed her own lunches, lived like a woman who had nothing to prove and nothing to show. That's where she met Kwame. He was at a community fundraiser, standing by the bar in a fitted navy blazer, talking loud and laughing louder. He worked as a mid-level manager at a logistics company, not making great money, but enough to feel important. He had a wide smile, broad shoulders, and the kind of confidence that fills up a room even when it's not earned. And when he noticed Nia standing near the exit, holding a cup of water with both hands, something about her quietness pulled him in like gravity. He pursued her relentlessly. Flowers delivered to her job every Friday. Handwritten notes slipped under her apartment door. Long phone calls that went past midnight where he did most of the talking and she did most of the listening. He told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever laid eyes on. He said he wanted to build a life with her. He said he would protect her. He said he would never let anyone make her feel small. Nia believed him, not because she was foolish. She was far from it. She believed him because she wanted to. She wanted to know that someone could love her. Not her grandmother's name, not the trust, not the lawyers who called once a month. Just her. the woman who packed PB and J for lunch and watered the plants on her windowsill every Sunday. So she made a decision. She would keep the trust hidden. She would keep the legal team at a distance. She would wear the anklet every day as her only connection to the world she'd left behind. And she would let Kwame prove himself. They married within a year, small ceremony, backyard reception. Nia paid for it quietly through a shell account the legal team managed. Kwame didn't ask where the money came from. He was too busy playing the role of the man of the house to question anything that made it easier. The first 6 months of the marriage were tolerable. Not beautiful, but not broken either. Kwame worked long hours at his company. Nia kept the apartment spotless, cooked dinner every night, and continued her quiet work at the nonprofit. She didn't nag. She didn't demand attention. She didn't ask Kwame to become someone he wasn't. She just loved him in the way she knew how. Steadily, quietly, without fanfare. But quiet love bores certain kinds of men. And Kwame was that kind of man. It started with him coming home late. Once a week at first, then 3 times, then every night. His shirts carried a perfume Nia didn't own. His phone buzzed at strange hours, and he'd leave the room to answer it. When Nia asked about it, calmly, softly, never with accusation, Kwame waved her off. "Don't start, Nia. I'm not in the mood." Then Lorraine appeared, and everything changed. She was a woman from Kwame's office, bold, flashy, the kind of woman who entered a room heels first and made sure every head turned. Designer bags on her shoulder, nails long enough to tap a countertop like a drum. Perfume so heavy, it announced her arrival before she even walked through the door. She started calling Kwame's phone at home, not in secret, openly, brazenly, while Nia sat right next to him on the couch, and Kwame answered, every single time. Sometimes he'd laugh into the phone and glance at Nia like he was daring her to say something. When Nia finally confronted him, no yelling, no tears, just a straight question asked with dignity, Kwame leaned back in his chair, looked her up and down, and said 6 words that split her open like a blade. "If you were enough, I wouldn't need her." He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather, like the words didn't carry the weight of a sledgehammer to the chest of a woman who had given him everything. That sentence broke something in Nia. Not loudly, not with a scream or a slam. It broke the way a bone fractures under slow, constant pressure. Silently, internally, in a place no one else can see. Gladys made it worse. She called Nia the very next day and said, "A good wife doesn't question her man. She adjusts. You'd better learn that before my son leaves you for good." And Trina, always performing, always recording, started posting subliminal videos mocking Nia's plain clothes, her natural hair, her quiet nature. One caption read, "Some women don't know how to keep a man because they don't know how to be a woman." It got 2,000 likes. Lorraine started sleeping over, first once a week, arriving late and leaving before sunrise like a woman who at least had the decency to be discreet. Then twice a week, then 3 times. Then she stopped leaving altogether. Her toothbrush appeared in Nia's bathroom, sitting in the holder next to Nia's like it had always been there. Her dresses filled one side of Nia's closet. Her perfume bottles lined up on Nia's vanity. Her high heels sat by Nia's front door, placed neatly beside the mat like they'd been invited. And the worst part? Nobody asked Nia if she was okay with any of it. Nobody sat her down and had a conversation. Nobody even pretended to feel guilty. It just happened, slowly, quietly, deliberately, like a takeover disguised as normalcy. Kwame didn't just allow it. He orchestrated it. He gave Lorraine the master bedroom on weekends and told Nia to sleep in the guest room. The guest room. In her own home. The room with the thin mattress and the window that didn't lock properly. The room where the heater barely worked in winter. And Nia went. Without arguing. Without slamming a door. She took her pillow, walked down the hall, and lay in the dark, listening to laughter bleed through the walls. Kwame started handing Lorraine money in front of Nia. Not secretly. Not tucked in a card. He'd pull out a roll of bills at the kitchen counter and peel off 50s and 100s like a man showing off for a crowd. He'd slide the money across the table to Lorraine and say, "Get yourself something nice, baby." Then he'd reach into his pocket, pull out a crumpled $20 bill, and drop it in front of Nia like he was tipping a waitress he didn't like. "Groceries," he'd say. That's it. One word. No eye contact, like she was a child who should feel lucky to receive anything at all. Nia had access to a fortune that would take Kwame 10,000 lifetimes to earn. She could have bought the building they lived in. She could have bought the entire block. But she said nothing. She took the 20. She bought the groceries. She cooked the meals. And she watched. The isolation deepened week by week. Gladys gave Lorraine Nia's seat at Sunday dinner. The chair at the head of the table, the one Nia had sat in every week since the wedding, suddenly belonged to Lorraine. Nia was told to eat in the kitchen, alone, standing at the counter, like staff. One evening, while washing dishes, Nia overheard voices from the living room. Kwame, Gladys, and Lorraine were discussing the house. Kwame wanted the property signed into his name only. Gladys agreed immediately. "Smart move. Protect yourself." Lorraine leaned in and laughed. She probably wouldn't even understand the paperwork. All three of them cackled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And Nia stood behind the kitchen wall, her soapy hands still, her breathing shallow, her fingers resting softly on the gold anklet beneath her pant leg. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Kwame organized a birthday dinner for Lorraine. Inside the house, at the table Nia set every morning. Using the dishes Nia washed every night, he bought a cake from the best bakery in the city, ordered 24 roses, had Gladys and Trina dress up like it was a 5-star event. He dimmed the lights, lit candles, put on music, and placed Lorraine at the head of the table like she was the woman of the house. Gladys raised her glass and said, "To the woman who finally makes my son happy." Trina clinked her drink and called Lorraine sister, loud enough for the walls to hear. Kwame kissed Lorraine on the forehead, pulled a velvet gift bag from behind his chair, and placed it in front of her like an offering. Nia was told to serve the cake. She brought the plate to the table and set it down gently in front of Lorraine. As she leaned forward, Lorraine's eyes dropped to Nia's ankle. She squinted at the gold anklet, then burst out laughing. "Girl, what is that? A dollar store bracelet?" Trina leaned down from her stool to look. She reached out and grabbed Nia's ankle, tugging at the chain like she was inspecting a toy. "Let me see that little cheap thing." Nia jerked her leg back. The clasp stretched. The chain pulled taut against her skin. For a split second it looked like it might break. And something behind Nia's eyes shifted. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder than both. Something final. She set the rest of the cake on the counter without a word. Turned around, walked to the bedroom. Nobody followed her. Nobody even noticed she'd left. The laughter at the table didn't even pause. But behind that closed door, something broke open inside Nia. Not in the way things had been breaking for months. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. This was different. This was a woman reaching the bottom and finding solid ground beneath her feet. She sat on the edge of the bed, held the anklet between her fingers. ran her thumb across the small key charm, feeling the grooves her grandmother's thumb had worn smooth over decades. She closed her eyes and took one long breath. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice. A voice answered on the other end, and Nia spoke 5 words that changed the direction of everything. "It's Nia. I'm ready." For the next 2 weeks, Nia became someone nobody in that house recognized. She was agreeable, obedient, almost pleasant. She woke up before everyone else and started breakfast without being asked. She cleaned the bathroom Lorraine used and replaced the towels without a word. She said, "Yes, ma'am," to Gladys with a softness that bordered on submission. She smiled at Lorraine in the hallway. Not a forced smile, not a tight-lipped one, but a genuine-looking warmth that confused Lorraine enough to make her squint. She ironed Kwame's shirts and hung them in the closet. She stopped eating dinner at the counter and took her plate to the guest room without complaint. She stopped looking hurt, stopped looking angry, stopped looking like anything at all except a woman who had finally, completely surrendered. Kwame noticed the change first. He watched her move through the house with this strange calm and mistook it for defeat. He leaned over to Lorraine one evening while Nia was doing dishes and said, "See, she finally knows her place." Lorraine laughed and sipped her wine. Gladys overheard from the living room and nodded like a woman who had won a long, exhausting war. Even Trina stopped recording because there was nothing left to mock. The fire was out. The fight was over. Or so they thought. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't have possibly seen behind those lowered eyes and quiet smiles, was that an empire was being assembled in the shadows. And Naya wasn't surrendering. She was positioning. Naya's legal team had activated, a team of 12. Forensic accountants pulled every financial record tied to Kwame's name and cross-referenced them with the trust's holdings. Property attorneys reviewed the deed to the house and confirmed it had always been held in a sub-trust Nia controlled. A private investigator began documenting Lorraine's spending habits, every dinner, every bag, every transaction made on accounts connected to Kwame, and a public relations team, the most discreet in the Southeast, began building a media rollout for the moment Nia decided to step into the light. Everything moved in absolute silence. No leaks, no whispers, no lawyers calling the house, nothing. Then the invitation arrived. A gilded envelope appeared in the mailbox addressed to Kwame. Inside was an invitation to the annual Black Excellence Gala, the most prestigious networking event in Atlanta. $2,000 a plate, a room full of the city's most powerful and accomplished black professionals. Kwame assumed his company had secured the invite. He bragged about it for a week straight. He bought a new suit. He told Lorraine to get her hair and nails done. He told Gladys and Trina to find something elegant to wear. And he told Nia to stay home. Nia looked at him, nodded once, said, "Okay," and she smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sad one. The kind of smile that a chess player gives right before saying checkmate. The night of the gala, Kwame pulled up to the venue in a rented black sedan. Lorraine was on his arm in a tight red dress. Gladys wore pearls she'd purchased on a credit card she couldn't afford. Trina tottered in heels 2 inches too high. They stepped through the double doors and into a world they didn't belong in, crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, live jazz floating through the air, round tables draped in white linen, and a who's who of Atlanta's black elite gathered in every corner. Kwame shook hands like he was running for office. Lorraine posed for selfies near the ice sculpture. Gladys told anyone who would listen about her successful son. Trina recorded everything, the food, the room, the people, like a tourist at a museum. They sat down, they ate, they drank, they felt like they'd arrived. Then the lights dimmed. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped to the stage. He was known in every boardroom in the city, respected, connected, powerful. He tapped the microphone and smiled warmly at the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. This evening, every plate, every musician, every scholarship that will be awarded is made possible by one extraordinary individual. A woman whose generosity and vision have quietly shaped this city in ways most of you have never seen. Please welcome to the stage the founder and chair of the Opal Legacy Trust, Ms. Nia." Kwame's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The room turned toward the entrance. The double doors swung open wide, and there she was. Nia walked in wearing a custom black gown that moved like water. Her hair was styled in an intricate crown of braids that framed her face like a work of art. Her shoulders were pulled back, her chin lifted. Her steps were slow, measured, deliberate, the walk of a woman who had earned every inch of ground beneath her feet. And there, just above, a pair of black silk heels. The thin gold anklet with the key charm caught the chandelier light and sparkled like a quiet declaration. The room stood, every chair pushed back, every hand came together. The applause was immediate, warm and thunderous. Kwame's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the edge of the table. Lorraine's manufactured smile collapsed. Gladys gripped the tablecloth with both hands like the room was spinning. Trina lowered her phone and stared with her mouth open. Nia climbed the steps to the stage without rushing. She placed her hands on either side of the podium. She looked out at the room, 500 faces staring back at her, and she let the silence settle for 3 full seconds. No nervous clearing of the throat, no shuffling of notes. Just a woman standing in her truth, letting the room feel the weight of the moment before she opened her mouth. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. Not loud, not angry, not even bitter. Just devastating in its stillness. She spoke the way a river moves, constant, unhurried, powerful enough to wear through stone. She spoke about what it felt like to be invisible in your own home, to wake up with cold water on your face and a command in your ear, to cook meals for people who mocked the taste and mocked the hands that made them, to sleep in a guest room you'd been banished to while a stranger wore your grandmother's robe and sat in your chair and ate food from your table like she had earned the right. She spoke about women who stay silent, not because they're weak, not because they don't have options, but because they're choosing their moment. Women who endure in plain sight while the world assumes they have nothing left to give. Every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples moved through the room. People set down their glasses. Forks stopped moving. Conversations at every table went quiet. Then she told them the truth. She told the room about her grandmother Opal, about the land, the patents, the mineral rights, the trust that had been built in silence over a century and passed down to a woman who chose to live modestly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to see if the people around her could love her without knowing what she held. She told them she was the sole owner of one of the largest private trusts in the Southeast, that the fortune had been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight, just like her. The screen behind her lit up, her name, her foundation, her holdings. The number displayed in bold letters across a 12-foot screen. $80 billion. The room didn't gasp. It went completely, absolutely, breathlessly still. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single glass touching a table. Nia looked out across the room. Her eyes found Kwame. She didn't say his name. She didn't point. She didn't need to. She looked directly at him and said, "You threw cold water on a woman who could have bought your entire family's future, and you did it to impress someone who won't even remember your name by next year." Silence. Kwame's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. He looked like a man watching his own house burn down from across the street. Helpless, speechless, and fully aware that he was the one who lit the match. Lorraine sat frozen. Her red dress suddenly felt too tight. Her makeup felt like a mask. She stared at the floor because looking up meant meeting the eyes of 500 people who now knew exactly what she was. Not a queen, not a boss, not a woman of status. Just a woman who had slept in another woman's bed and worn another woman's robe and laughed at another woman's anklet and never once had the sense to wonder who she was really laughing at. Gladys pressed her cloth napkin against her face with both hands and didn't move. Her pearls, the ones she'd bought on credit to look important tonight, suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds around her neck. And Trina, the woman who had recorded everything, mocked everything, laughed at every single thing Nia did, sat with her phone face down on the table and her hands folded in her lap like a child who had just been sent to the principal's office. Nia stepped back from the microphone. She didn't bow. She didn't wave. She simply stood there and let the room decide what to do with the truth she'd given them. The room erupted, not in chaos, not in gossip, in respect. A standing ovation so long and so thunderous that the crystal chandeliers trembled above their heads. People wiped tears from their eyes. Strangers turned to each other, nodding. And Nia stood on that stage, the woman they had poured cold water on, the woman they had mocked and starved and banished to a guest room. And she didn't cry. She didn't gloat. She simply existed, fully and unapologetically, in the light she had earned. Within 72 hours, Kwame's entire world collapsed like a house built on sand. Nia's legal team filed for divorce. The paperwork was devastating, meticulous, airtight, and delivered without emotion. Every asset was audited. The house, which had always been held inside a sub-trust that Nia controlled, was legally reclaimed and vacated. Kwame was served the papers at his office, hand-delivered by a man in a gray suit who said 3 words, "You've been served." His co-workers watched through the glass walls of the conference room. His manager called him in before lunch. Lorraine disappeared like smoke. She didn't pack slowly. She didn't leave a goodbye note. She didn't even answer the phone. She blocked Kwame's number within 48 hours, scrubbed every photo of them from her social media, and moved out of her apartment by the end of the week. She wasn't heartbroken. She was humiliated. She had attached herself to a man she believed had something to offer, and the moment she realized he didn't even own the roof over his own head, she evaporated. That's all she ever was, vapor dressed in designer clothes. Gladys called Nia 47 times in 1 week. Nia didn't answer once. Not a text, not a voicemail, nothing. On the 48th call, Nia's attorney picked up and informed Gladys, in a tone as cold as a courtroom floor, that any further contact would be documented as harassment and addressed accordingly. Gladys hung up. She never dialed again. Trina posted a tearful apology video that same week, mascara running, voice cracking. She looked into the camera and begged for forgiveness. Within hours, Nia's legal team issued a cease and desist for every video Trina had recorded inside the home without Nia's consent. The apology was deleted by sunrise. Trina's entire page went private. Kwame tried one last time. He drove across town to Nia's new residence, a penthouse in Buckhead that cost more per month than Kwame made in a year. He parked on the street, walked through the glass lobby doors. He stood in the center of that marble floor and shouted her name. His voice echoed off the walls. Security came. 2 men in dark suits. They asked him to leave. He refused. They escorted him to the curb, gently, professionally, like a man being removed from a building he could never afford to enter again. 14 floors above, Nia stood at the window. She watched Kwame get smaller and smaller as he walked back to his car. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She didn't send a message. She just turned away from the glass and continued her evening in silence. 3 months later, Kwame sat alone in a studio apartment on the east side of Atlanta, the kind of place where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor's television and the hallway always smells like old carpet and pine sol. No Lorraine calling him baby. No Nia cooking in the kitchen. No mother answering his calls. No sister reposting his photos. Just 4 walls, a leaky faucet, and the sound of his own breathing. He had lost his job 2 weeks after the divorce papers arrived. Not fired exactly, but strongly encouraged to resign. The whispers at the office had become unbearable. People who used to shake his hand in the break room suddenly couldn't remember his name. His manager reassigned his biggest accounts. His parking spot got given to a new hire. The message was clear without anyone saying a word. He sat at a small folding table with a bowl of cereal and his phone. The spoon sat untouched in the milk, slowly sinking. He scrolled through the news the way lonely people do, not looking for anything, just trying to fill the silence. And then he stopped. His thumb froze on the screen. The headline read, "Naya Opal Foundation launches $200 million initiative for women rebuilding after domestic abuse." Below it was a photograph of Nia standing at a podium in front of a crowd, calm, commanding, regal, wearing a simple black dress with her hair pulled back, and on her ankle, visible just above a pair of flat sandals, the gold anklet with the key charm, the same anklet Trina had called cheap, the same anklet Lorraine had laughed at, the same anklet that had been on Naya's body every single day of their marriage, holding a secret none of them had the sense to see. Kwame stared at that photo for a long time, and it wasn't the money that hollowed him out. It wasn't the gala, it wasn't the lawyers or the penthouse or the headline or the number on the screen. It was the memory of her face that night in the kitchen, dripping wet, hands trembling, eyes steady, cooking eggs at 3 in the morning for a woman who wasn't worth a single second of Naya's time. He finally understood what he had lost. Not a fortune, not a title, not a connection to power. He lost a woman who had loved him quietly, completely, and without conditions. A woman who had hidden the most powerful part of herself, just to see if he was capable of loving her without it. And he had answered that question every single day of their marriage, with cruelty, with disrespect, with cold water poured on her face in the dark. There was no calling her back. There was no apology big enough. There was no second chance waiting on the other side of what he'd done. Some doors, once closed, stay closed forever, and Nia was the door. Nia went home, not to the penthouse, not to Atlanta, not to any of the places a woman with her resources could have gone, the villas, the islands, the private estates. She went back to rural Georgia, back to the red dirt road, back to Opal's house. She had it restored with the kind of care that only love can guide, not modernized, not redesigned, not filled with expensive furniture or technology or anything that would have made Opal shake her head. Just loved again. The porch was rebuilt with the same kind of wood. The screen door got a new screen but kept its old creak. The garden out back was replanted, collards, tomatoes, okra, the same things Opal had grown every season. The quilt Opal had stitched by hand was cleaned, pressed, and laid across the same bed it had always belonged on. Naya sat in Opal's rocking chair on the porch as the sun began its slow descent behind the pines. The chair rocked gently beneath her. The evening crickets had already started their chorus, filling the air with the same sound Nia had fallen asleep to as a child. Her bare feet rested on the warm wooden planks. Her hands lay open in her lap. The anklet caught the last bit of sunset and glowed soft gold against her dark skin, the little key charm resting against her ankle bone like it had always known its way home. A young girl from down the road walked up the gravel path. She was maybe 10 or 11. Thin braids pulled back with colorful beads. Dusty shoes that had seen too many miles on dirt roads. Hands clasped behind her back like she was working up the courage to say something important. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looked up at Nia with wide, curious eyes and said, "Excuse me, ma'am. How did you get so strong?" Nia looked at her for a long moment. She saw something in that girl's face, something familiar. The same quiet eyes, the same careful way of standing, the same look Nia used to have when she was small, sitting at Opal's feet, wondering how one woman could carry so much weight and still smile at the end of the day. And then Nia smiled. Not the polite smile she'd given Kwame all those months. Not the careful, measured smile she'd worn while cooking in that kitchen at 3 in the morning. A real one, full and warm and unhurried, like sunlight finally breaking through a week of heavy clouds. She said, "I didn't become strong, baby. I just stopped letting weak people convince me I wasn't." The girl smiled back. Nia touched the anklet one last time, ran her thumb over the key charm, over the same grooves Opal's thumb had smoothed before her. Then she leaned back in the rocking chair, closed her eyes, and let the quiet take over. Peace. Deep, earned, unshakable peace. Not every silent woman is broken. Some are just waiting, not for revenge, but for the moment they finally choose themselves. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room while people underestimated you, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, your silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest power you'll ever carry. See you in the next one.